And on the farm, we are trying everything we can to not do tillage, because tillage destroys the microbial biome, and now you're losing everything that we've gained over the last 15 or 16 years.
I understand that you also have a farm. I think it's about 7,000 acres, last I heard.
That's about right.
And tell us a little bit about the strategies that you've been undertaking.
Sure. We've been on a long journey, about 18 years of I didn't realize it was called regenerative 18 years ago, but that's kind of the term we're using today. We have transitioned our farm from mass tillage, mass destruction, to total regenerative organic with no tillage. So, and doing this at scale. So we are now heading into year 9 of no synthetic inputs, 0 of any kind. We no longer, we're heading into year 5 of no government subsidy payments. We're not in any government programs. So when the folks say that you can't do this, that's bullshit. You can do this.
So tell us a little bit about how the regenerative agricultural movement is actually happening in the United States from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're on the verge of being greenwashed out. We need to keep the momentum going, like what you're doing, Chip, and we need more films out there. We need more teaching sessions. That's the next push right now, is teaching the farmers to be able to step out of their comfort zone, because what they're doing, the gentleman that was before did a very nice job of explaining this. It's heritage, it's what they've done, it's what their father's done, it's what their grandfather's done. The last thing you better do is walk in and tell them they're doing something wrong, because they'll politely ask you to leave. So we need to show them that let's take a couple of ideas that maybe this farmer's doing and a couple that this farmer's doing, take them home, incorporate them on your farm, very small acres. You cannot jeopardize the livelihood of your farm. And we have to make sure that whatever the concept or the idea is that you want this farm to try, it has to work the first time. Because if it doesn't work, they're going to come back and say, I tried to tell you it wouldn't work here. I'm never going to try this again, because I've seen it happen. So we have to be very sure that the things that we have asked them to try to do differently, they've got good education on how to do it, and not only education to get started, who is the support? Who's the holding hand? Where do I go to find questions when I get into cereal rye that is now 6 feet tall, and what in the world am I going to do with this? So that's where we have to be very, very careful.
They're doing a lot of work down at ASU with Peter. What are some of the other universities? I know CSU is very strong here in Colorado. What's that landscape look like throughout the nation?
I'm probably not the right one to ask that, because I do not get very many phone calls. Now, I am a graduate of Purdue University. They don't much know that I exist or our farm exists. Now, there are a couple renegades that are there, entomologists and soil scientists that care, that want to come out, do research on the farm, just see what's going on, looking at our farm, comparing it to other models. I cannot stress enough the teaching. We had the first time ever inaugural teaching event on our farm this year. Every state in the United States has a soil health specialist. And some states have more than one, but every state has one. We invited every soil health specialist to come to our farm this summer. We had 17 show up. That to me is amazing, coming to Indiana to hear how we're doing it on our farm. Out of the 2-day training event, we got the feedback back. It was the best event they'd ever been to. They learned the most they'd ever learned at any other event they've ever been to. And now the whole goal of this training was to move it to other states. And they all agreed they were going to work to try to get an event like this in their own state. So I think this is exactly what needs to happen. Now, while they were, not while they were there at this training, but about 2 years ago, we had our soil health specialist come out, and she wanted to do some water infiltration testing and earthworm counts and things like that. And I said, have at it, that'd be awesome. I'd love to see what you come up with. Well, and I was a little surprised with Peter's numbers on the cattle, because I really thought that water infiltration rate would have been higher than those numbers. On our farm right now, our average water infiltration rate is 20 inches an hour. Our earthworm count is 1.5 million earthworms per acre. We no longer apply any synthetic fertilizers. We've taken the salts and the acids away. We are in actual, just, it's an overdrive. Our microbial biome is in overdrive. We do PLFA counts every year. We take soil health scores. We take aggregate stability. Our aggregate stability now is about 12 inches deep. What that means is that the soil is creating the aggregates, and you can only create aggregates when you stop tilling, and we're now at about 12 inches deep. So when you think about the soil as a living, breathing organism, because that's what it is, and now that we have aggregate stability that's 12 inches deep, think of the water holding capacity we have, think of the oxygen and the sugars that we can put into those pores, because that's what it's all about. I'm not a biologist, I'm not a chemist, but I do know that you need to have green plants growing, and you need to maximize photosynthesis, which maximizes the amount of oxygen and the amount of sugar being pumped into the ground. That's as simple as I can make it, and that's all the more difficult it needs to be. There are people that are expert. I think the lady here is a chemist. Let her tell us how the chemistry works. I just understand that we need to maximize photosynthesis. And also, another thing that we really strive on is, since we don't use any synthetic inputs, is we need to grow our own oxygen. Right now, Chip, we are breathing about 78% nitrogen right now. If we were to walk outside and go out into the countryside, above every acre of ground sits between 20 and 30,000 tons of nitrogen. 20,000 tons. We only need about 100 to raise a corn crop to do it effectively and being a steward of the land. I mean, I know people that put on way more amounts than 100 pounds of nitrogen. But the point is, we can capture this free nitrogen through these cover crop packages that include legumes. They fix the nitrogen, and we have shown that we can fix upwards of 250 pounds of nitrogen with certain legumes.
Let's talk a little bit about your farm here, and I want to save some time to go to Q&A. So, but the 7,000 acres now, what crops are you actually growing, and how have you seen the change since you went into the regenerative?
That's a good question. Corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, peas, buckwheat, milo, cover crops, cattle, and sheep. So when you think about this, you start to begin to realize how inefficient monocrops are. Like corn is a monocrop. That's the only thing growing in that field. So what we've found, Chip, is we are now commingling cash crops together, growing them together, seeking out the synergies they have, and then you have to find your buyer at the end of the day. So let's talk about two examples. Let's say we've got a buyer that doesn't care if peas and wheat are mixed together. So we will take those to maturity, harvest them, and then that will be supplied to that buyer as a mixture. You're raising the protein content of the pea, you're raising the nutrient density of the wheat. Everything is a win-win. Now let's say now you've got a buyer that doesn't want to have those commingled. So what we have done, we've vertically integrated here. We are now cleaning our own crops. So we are raising peas and wheat together, clean the two, separate them, sell the peas over here and sell the wheat over there. Now, to really answer your question, corn hates our system right now. I do not have the corn figured out because corn does not like competition. We can raise enough fuel to raise corn, but corn does not like the competition. It wants a clean slate, and on the farm, we are trying everything we can to not do tillage because tillage destroys the microbial biome, and now you're losing everything that we've gained over the last 15 or 16 years.
That was my next question. You're really focusing on no-till. So on the corn side, is that a valuable crop that you miss then?
No. I mean, some people are going to say, well, we've got to feed the world. Will our system feed the world? Probably not today. It's not close enough today, but we're trying everything we possibly can. We're never going back. I mean, my wife Carol is with me today. This is way more than farming. This is about building soil health and building human health. We don't think about building human health enough. Everybody wants to talk about increasing nutrient density, and I'm all for that. I totally agree, but there's another side of the human health. Let's think about the farmer here. We have been asked to use chemicals that have the skull and crossbones on them. That's death. Why in the world should we be allowed to live in this world? So we do not want to live in that world. Are we going to ever break a yield record again? No, I hope we never do. We are not farming for yield. We are farming for profitability. And that's what we do on our farm. I mean, right now, Chip, a farm our size, we are averaging right now about $2.7 million savings annually of input costs. $2.7 million. So now when you look at the math on the backside of the equation, you don't need a lot of yield to be profitable. So we focus more on diversity, building soil health, building human health, and trying to maximize the profitability per acre.
Okay, I got two more questions, and I want to go to the audience. The first one is, we're talking about carbon sequestration. Hunter Levins made a comment earlier about how much regenerative agriculture could actually pull out of the atmosphere, and she's talking in terms of gigatons. Now, from your perspective, is that right? Because you have to also talk about all the other farmers in the world outside of the United States if we could get that conversion rate in the right numbers here in the U.S.
Yeah, I totally agree with those numbers, but here's what I would like to throw out for everyone to kind of think about. I think what we need to ask ourselves is, what does success look like? Do you think success is going to require 100% of this to be regenerative farming? I don't think that's possible. So we can't expect that. In my opinion, I think success looks like 40 to 50%. If you could get 40 or 50% of the farmland to farm in a regenerative manner, using cover crops, stopping tillage, massively reducing inputs, if not stopping inputs, think of the change we could create around the world if you just changed 50% of the farm ground. That's the way. Now, maybe that's too simplistic, and maybe that puts barriers on things, but we have to understand that I don't read a lot of books, but I've read a few, and Malcolm Gladwell's got a book called Tipping Point, and if you folks have never read it, you should read it. It only takes about 11% to tip it. That's it. So, and I see that because the things that we don't try to do, Chip, is we don't try to shove our farming methods down anybody's throat. And we just do our thing, we teach, we preach, and we do all these things we do, and then people show up. A validation we had this year got a phone call from a local farmer, farms over 50,000 acres. Hey, Rick, you got an hour to meet me? I want to learn about cover crops and no-till. Well, why in the world would you want to do that? Because I see change coming, and I want to be in front of it, not behind it.
Right, well, cool. So you are a small family farmer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how many others are there in the United States? Do we have any numbers on that?
No, I don't. I don't know that. Somebody? Anybody? 10,000. 10,000? Okay.
So 10,000 small, quote unquote, small.
And what's small mean? 5,000 or less? Is it 5,000 or less, 2,500 or less? 2,500 or less, 10,000, that's, okay.
So you're not a small family farmer.
We're probably middle.
Okay. And we know we're losing them, and we know that there's a lot of reasons behind that, but mostly that it can't make a living competing against big ag, right? And so as this whole movement has taken off with the regenerative agriculture, community-supported agriculture popping up everywhere, how do you see the next, 5 years playing out here?
Yeah, next 5 years, again, I think that I think the foundation has been laid, okay? I think what we really need next is the next big push of teachers. We need the teachers teaching the teachers so they can go out and make sure that this farmer group is going to succeed at what it is, whatever it is they're trying to do. And we got to remember about context here. Louisiana farmers are going to farm way different than the Iowa farmers do. So we've got to understand that. And we have to understand that we probably, I think what should happen, if you want, I'll just give you my idea. I think the United States, and let's just stay here in the United States for right now, it needs to be regionalized. And I think you can make it into 9 regions. And each region needs an ambassador, one person that's in charge of applying the principles of soil health. If you don't know what they are, there's 6 of them. Look them up when you got a minute. Principles of soil health. And you need a body that sits at the top of maybe 4 people that are monitoring what these ambassadors are doing in each region. And then you can, once you understand the way each region needs to farm, then when the carbon markets are truly ready to come to the table for the farmer, now you've got a system that's already in place that's regionalized, because the soils in Arizona do not have near the carbon that the soils in Iowa do, so they cannot be on the same page. But yet, if you make it so that it becomes in balance, then things start to work and make sense for the future.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like we're moving in the right direction, at least for now. Okay, let's go to the audience. Who's got a burning question out here? Well, I want to go to Dan here. He's the youngest guy in the crowd. So let's hear what not the future generation, but the younger generation is concerned about. Go ahead. Could you get a microphone, please? Sure. Thank you.
If you don't mind, tell me where you're from, please. That kind of helps me.
Sure. Is it working? Yeah. Yes, thank you both. I'm from New Jersey.
Okay.
My question is, when you're alternating between a primary crop and a cover crop, and when you go to terminate your cover crop, like let's say you use goats or sheep, obviously that wouldn't kill the root system. So how do you prevent that from resprouting during the duration that you're growing your cash crop?
Great question.
Thank you.
You have to decide what your termination end game is, okay? Ours is no tillage and no chemistry. So we are using a lot of annual species that will be included in the cocktail of a species that will winter kill. That means a species that would get to freezing or below will terminate that species. So when you use an annual like cereal rye, you can terminate cereal rye with a roller crimper. At the right time of its growth cycle, it's when it's dropping pollen or at anthesis, you roll it with the crimper, it goes flat. The gentleman I had a picture of it prior. That creates this biomass, this thatch, this mulch, whatever you want to call it. It's about, depending on how well you had, we're getting somewhere of 12 to 14,000 pounds of biomass. That will suppress weeds for most of the growing season. So to answer your question, we don't use very many perennials that the sheep and the cattle are going to eat on, because we cannot terminate those. So you have to understand what your termination is. Now, he had also shown in there, it was a very good presentation, you can break, and if there's any grazers in here, I'm sorry, you got to break the rules sometimes, but if you overgraze and take it down to the ground like he's talking about, you can terminate certain perennials at the right time by overgrazing. And that's not the proper way to graze, but if you've got a field that's coming out of grazing and going to go into row crop, that's what you would do.
Thank you very much.
Okay, one here and then one more. We'll go to Pete for the last one. Okay, go ahead, Bill.
Am I on? There we go. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin.
All right.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether your county extension agents would be good teachers, whether that network could be valuable, and how well schooled that network is in regenerative agriculture.
That's a great question. I'm going to also give your state a big plug here in just a second. It's from Madison, Wisconsin. We had a training last year also of DCs, which is the acronym for district conservationist. Every county has a DC, okay, and they're affiliated with typically the land grant university of that state. Okay, we had 50 kids, and I'm going to call them kids because they were 23 to 27. 50. I asked them one question at the beginning. How many folks in here have an ag background? You know how many hands went up in the air? 0. Talk about being thrown to the wolves. You are exactly correct. That teaching needs to happen yesterday. Because that farmer walks in the door, what is that crazy guy down the road doing down here? Can somebody in this office tell me what that guy's doing? And they need to be able to have those conversations with that farmer. Yes, that is extremely critical. Now, here's the plug for your state. Wisconsin has, last I knew, I think you're up to 50 now. You have 50 farmer-led groups in your state. It's the only state that I know of that has that many. There are other states that have some farmer-led groups, but nothing like yours. It's incredible. And they have conferences, they have guest speakers come in, they have teaching events. It's a great model to look after. So be proud to be from Wisconsin.
Okay, we're out of time, but we'll go one here with Pete, and you'll have the last question, and then we're going to go to the next panel.
So I really think about how we can move this quickly. And one comment I would make is you probably own most of your own land, right?
We own a little over half of it.
Right. So you have the ability to think long-term, and you're adding value to your land. Unfortunately, so much of the land in the country today is tenant farmed. And I tell you, I've been on Bill Gates' farm. He will not sign a contract for more than 1 year. Those people are never going to think like this. And then my question is, in terms of thinking how to move quickly, you mentioned you have sheep and cattle. Gabe Brown has sheep and cattle. I personally think it's a waste of time talking to a farmer that grows 10,000 acres of a row crop to convince him to run cattle up. So I don't even have that conversation.
Yeah,
with people.
we don't have that conversation either. If we're going to try to move a farm that size, it's row crops only. Let's try to get a cereal grain in the mix and then set up. The ultimate goal is to set up a timing event to plant a cover crop that's going to help the next cash crop. That's the only thing we can do with some of these guys. But I know we're out of time, Chip. But typically, and this is with anybody in the room. If you go out and just try something a little bit different, and then you say, wow, that's. Maybe changing my diet and getting a little healthier is not that bad of a deal. You slowly start to all of a sudden, over time, you were all in. And you see the same thing with these. If you could just get them to start a few acres, they're going to say, wow, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? I see it all the time. But I'm with you, though. There's a lot of one-year contracts out there, but they've been doing them for 25 years. Not all of them, but some of them. Chip, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Thanks for
Thank
coming
you.
by. And let's give a big hand for the family farmers, can't we?